Hello, I'm Kai Leota,
And I'm Roya Manchester.
and we're from Northwest Academy in Portland, Oregon. And our presentation is on how ocean acidification deleteriously impacts Chinook salmon, Oncorhynchus chichawa. And this image is of Chinook salmon making their way up Ship Creek to Anchorage, Alaska to spawn.
In our presentation, we will be covering the chemistry of ocean acidification, what is it, how does it work, the importance of Chinook salmon to surrounding ecosystems, how Chinook salmon are affected by ocean acidification throughout their life cycle, and most importantly, what you can do to help. Chinook salmon are very important to the environment because they contain many proteins, fats, and macronutrients, including nitrogen and phosphorus. And as you can see in this diagram, when salmon decompose, they release nutrients into the surrounding water, which are then absorbed by algae and bacteria, which are in turn eaten by aquatic insects. These nutrients help grow the population of aquatic insects, which are vital food sources for fish and birds. And according to a University of Alaska study, juvenile salmon in streams where there were 2 or more adult carcasses per square meter of stream bottom grew larger than juvenile salmon in a habitat with no carcasses present. Juvenile salmon with carcasses in their habitats were recorded to have more omega-3 fatty acids and lipids, which are fats that serve as energy reserves in times with less food.
What is ocean acidification? Ocean acidification is a process where the oceans absorb excess CO2 from the atmosphere that are caused by increased emissions by either humans or other sources. Due to this factor, the ocean water has become approximately 30% more acidic since pre-industrial times, before the 18th century, mostly due to humans emitting so many fossil fuels into the atmosphere to power our everyday lives. Increasing acidity causes a decrease in argonite, which causes harm to many marine organisms, including crustaceans. It also causes an increase in hydrogen ions in the ocean, in addition to a decrease in pH, and those hydrogen ions bond to the calcium carbonate within the shells of some crustaceans, which essentially dissolve their shells, which makes it survival very difficult for those species. And crustaceans being affected affects almost every other species because many other species rely on crustaceans for food. The exact chemical reaction is that the CO2 from the atmosphere reacts with the ocean water to form carbonic acid, which then transforms into hydrogen ions, which decrease marine biodiversity, decrease abundance of species, and causes harm to animals and coastal communities.
How are Chinook salmon affected by issues such as climate change and ocean acidification throughout their life cycle? With roe, or Chinook salmon eggs, climate change-associated increases in water temperature are a huge issue as they raise the mortality rate of Chinook salmon, as seen in the Californian heatwave of 2021, in which 75% of Californian winter run eggs died. However, studies show that salmon roe are least affected by low pH, with Chinook salmon roe being found to be one of the most resistant out of all the juvenile stages of Chinook salmon. But mining and dam construction do cause less successful spawning due to the disruption of the gravel that salmon need to make redds, as well as the overall downward trend in Chinook salmon size. For Alevin, rising temperatures associated with climate change are a huge issue as they result in more snowmelts running into freshwater streams, causing increased water flow that disrupts their habitats. Studies also find that alevin are the most sensitive to low pH out of all the juvenile stages, with pH levels of a weak acid, which is 4.5 to 5, resulting in increased mortality rate. For fry, warmer waters are still an issue as they make it harder for the sensitive Chinook salmon to properly grow. But their main concern is their food source, crustaceans, being harmed by ocean acidification, which causes less food for the fry and increases their mortality rates. As Chinook salmon grow, they become more resilient to climate change and ocean acidification, but they are not immune. For smolts, climate change causes higher water levels that harm estuaries, which are vital for them as they transition from land to sea. However, adult salmon are very resilient, and there are no viable studies that show evidence of them experiencing behavioral changes due to ocean acidification, unlike other species of salmon like coho or pink. For mature adult salmon, elevated water temperatures reduce the speed that they can swim, resulting in increased mortality rates and decreased spawning rates. However, they are very resilient to low pH, while ocean acidification does still cause a decrease in the number of salmon that return to spawn.
As a part of our presentation, we decided to make artistic projects representing the Chinook salmon life cycle. For mine, I decided to use Adobe Photoshop and create a small artwork for each of the different life cycles. So first there's the egg, and then there's the fry, the par, the smolt, the mature adult, and the spawning phase. And I decided to make an environment that the Chinook salmon would live in.
For my AR, I sculpted each stage of salmon life out of air-dried clay and painted them with acrylic paint. I also included a label of the type of moment of life cycle and also what they are affected by most in terms of climate change and ocean acidification. I have the roe, the alevin, the fry, the smolt, the adult salmon, and the mature adult salmon that spawns.
Okay, now let's play a game. Where's that fish?
Can you find the 6 stages in a Chinook salmon's life?
Have you found 1, 2?
Can you find them all?
Okay, let's go through where they are.
Okay. If you can see there, behind that rock are the Chinook salmon roe, and to the right of that are the alevin hiding in the river bottom. And then if you go above that, you'll see the fry and some seaweed, and then right at the top of the river are the smolts beginning their navigation to the sea. And then you have the adult salmon coming home to spawn, and then you have the fully mature adult Chinook salmon laying eggs.
Okay, so this is the first article analysis on an article about the effects of ocean warming with stable and fluctuating ocean acidification on the seawater transition in Chinook salmon smolts. Basically, its purpose was to determine how increased acidity and temperature within the ocean affects Chinook salmon during the transition between the river and the ocean through simulated conditions. And the results that they got was that there are no severe, long-lasting physiological effects in any of the treatment groups. But it does cause increased plasma ion levels, which is Na+ and Cl- within the fish short term. And it also increased sensitivity shortly after the transfer into more acidic ocean water from the stream water. But after 18 days, most of the Na+ and Cl- concentrations remained basically the same as freshwater. So it went back down to normal levels. But at lower temperatures but fluctuating CO2 concentration, vulnerability of gill ion concentration or regulation occurred. And some ideas for further research are a longer-term experiment, basically to see if there really are no long-lasting physiological effects, and study the salmon over their entire life cycle, and an experiment which uses the real ocean to better simulate all of its effects, since a simulation of the ocean cannot get all of the variables that the real ocean would have.
For our second article analysis, we chose to analyze the salmon abundance in the Salish Sea from 1984 to 2018. The Salish Sea passes through British Columbia and Washington, and roughly 473 mature Chinook salmon passed through it in 2018, which is a 60% reduction since 1984, when they were first declared endangered. As of 2018, most stocks of recorded salmon show a consistent number returning year over year, but some individual stocks have shown variable numbers of fish returning to spawn. Data from 2018 also shows that age and size of returning Chinook salmon is decreasing as well. Overall, there is no data indicating a positive trend of salmon abundance. And as you can see on this graph, it indicates that decline.
Now it's time for some trivia. Okay, so the questions are, how many stages of the Chinook salmon life cycle are there? What % of Chinook salmon eggs died in 2021 in the California drought? And how much more acidic is the ocean since pre-industrial times? What do you think? Okay, let's look at the answers. So, there are 6 stages of the Chinook salmon life cycle. 75% of Chinook salmon eggs died in 2021 in the California drought. And the ocean has gotten 30% more acidic since pre-industrial times due to ocean acidification and excess CO2 produced in the atmosphere. Ocean acidification is a large issue, so it's important that you and society as a whole try to make it so that its lessons, like its effects, are decreased. So to decrease the effects of ocean acidification, firstly, the amount of fossil fuels emissions must be reduced. The amount of carbon in the atmosphere needs to go down, because if carbon keeps being pumped into the atmosphere, then it'll keep being absorbed into the ocean, and the pH will further decrease, the acidity will go up, and many animals will die. A way to do this is to switch to renewable energy. Drive electric. Use solar or wind power instead of the emissions-intensive burning of fossil fuels. Or take the bus. And it's not just the individual that has to do this. Governments must also put into place policies that de-incentivize fossil fuels and incentivize renewable energy. And beyond that, they also must set aside space for mangrove swamps and other green spaces to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, utilizing photosynthesis, and turn that carbon dioxide into oxygen and make it so that our atmospheres aren't so full of greenhouse gases. And by reducing the amount of fossil fuels and CO2 in the atmosphere, it reduces the amount of H+ ions in the ocean by increasing the pH and decreasing the amount of carbonic acid. And the greenhouse gas emissions come from basically everything anyone does in life. Electricity and heat production, agriculture, transportation, industry, and pretty much everything else.
What can you do to help Chinook salmon? You can fight climate change. Chinook salmon are primarily affected by rising water temperatures and low pH values, which are both caused by human-induced CO2 emissions. As of 2022, the leading source of carbon emissions is transportation, with 28%, roughly one-third, of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector caused by transportation, mainly the burning of fossil fuels needed to power cars. And in 2024, a study found that by taking the bus, you could reduce your personal emissions by 33%. You can also help by volunteering. Restoring endangered salmon runs, specifically runs of wild Chinook salmon, is vitally important to the ecosystem at large, not only for endangered predators that rely on salmon, like the southern resident killer whale, but for the livelihoods of many indigenous communities. The best way to become directly involved in conservation is through volunteering, where you could help with conservation efforts such as surveying juvenile salmon, planting trees and native plants to help the surrounding ecosystem, and working to educate the rest of the community on salmon conservation. There are countless opportunities to volunteer to help salmon across the United States. For example, here in Portland, there are volunteering opportunities like the World Salmon Council and ODFW.
Okay, so in conclusion, ocean acidification is obviously a serious issue to both Chinook salmon and all ocean species that interact in the ocean food web. And society does not attempt and really try to reduce fossil fuel emissions through renewable energy or other means, ocean acidification will continue, and it will continue to get worse. Chinook salmon populations are decreasing, with mortality rates increased across all life cycles, but they demonstrate moderate resiliency. But again, they still possess increased mortality due to their interaction with the food web. Even though Chinook salmon may not be directly negatively affected by increased acidity and decreased pH, their food sources could be. And especially within the transition between the river and the sea, the mortality has increased directly from increased acidity. And if climate change becomes more severe, the deleterious effects on Chinook salmon will be further exacerbated. And if they go extinct, then an invaluable food source for keystone species, predators, and coastal communities will be gone. And finally, these are all the sources we used to research our slideshow, and we thank all of the authors immensely for creating these works that we could use. We would like to thank you for your time, and thank you for listening in our presentation. And yeah.
Thank you.